Hello, good evening. I'm Matan Levkovich. So yeah, maybe I'll start just sharing what you've witnessed before was an improvised performance. It's not something that I prepared. It's something that, let's say, is kind of embedded in my physical practice. And I was just taking some time to compose different music that will accompany my experience, and I practiced the metaphysical body practice in front of you. So it wasn't really a choreography, a performance, yeah. And yeah, I would like to maybe, wait, where is all my notes? Yeah, so I want to start by giving you kind of a walk through the presentation so that you have a little bit of a way to orient yourself between the different information I'm going to be sharing with you. So the main thing that I'm trying to investigate is, can we experience dance as a substance? And in this context, can dance offer us the possibility to access different altered state of consciousness? And the research that I've been doing could be understood as a phenomenological research, which means that we are using direct experience as a way to generate knowledge. Now, it's happening within the frame of contemporary dance and contact improvisation, which I will elaborate with you what are those research frames. So we're going to start with talking a little bit about my personal background and the history of the practice, kind of to give you a bit of a wider entry into the conversation. And afterwards, I want to talk a little bit about the fields of research. What is contemporary dance? What is contact improvisation? This is kind of the broader frame in which I'm working. And afterwards, I'm going to be talking to you about the two important settings in which these are the kind of practical settings where I'm practicing my research, which are performance setting and a jam setting, and we will talk about them. And then we will dive into the different altered states that I believe are accessible for everyone who are interested in diving into that kind of practice. And the states are the somatic state, the kinetic state, and the imaginative state, and we're gonna dive into them. I understand, since we are recording, I understood that we will have to have if you have questions, to put them at the end of the presentation and not during the presentation. So feel free to write yourself notes, and at the end I will give you some time to ask questions. But if you don't understand something, because I maybe my English or you didn't hear, just you can say, hey Matan, could you repeat it, and interrupt me, okay? All right, so let's go into a little bit the history. So I started dancing 15 years ago, and before that I was working in the tech industry in Israel, where I was born. And dance became like a very big shift in my personal life, and it also became my career. And when I started dancing, I encountered two main practices. One was contemporary dance, and one was contact improvisation. And within the frame of contact improvisation, I had the chance to experience jamming with other people. And in the frame of contemporary dance, I had the opportunity to perform in front of live audience. And both of those experiences, jamming with other people and performing, I have quite a vivid memory how these first naive experiences, I had the notion that I'm kind of sliding off my normal state. And if I'm thinking about it now in retrospective, so this was kind of the first very naive experiences of accessing altered states while dancing. And during the years, I kept on experiencing it in different occasions, and it really grew in me the curiosity to understand more what am I experiencing while I'm dancing, and also to develop pedagogical tools, also to transmit these experiences further, and also to develop artistic tools in order to be able to share them in a through performance art. And yeah, so I had this kind of big shift in my pedagogical and artistic work toward the topic that we're going to be talking today. And last year, quite a major thing happened within the frame of my school movement lab that I'm directing. I had the chance to work with a group of 15 dancers, and we went through a process of a whole year, in which at the end of the year we had the aim to present a public performance. And during the artistic process, kind of the artistic question started to clarify, and we figured out that what we are asking ourselves is exactly the question I posed before. Can we view dance as a substance for tripping? So can dance help us to access other state of consciousness? And during this year, it was the first time within my practice that I really started to develop a clear discourse and a language in order to be able to transmit it, and hence we are today me being able to talk about it, which before it was, again, more something that was still bounded in the realm of experience. And this year, I'm lucky enough to continue this research with a new group of people, and let's see where we're gonna travel further. Yes, and the result last year was a public performance of 45 minutes that we have presented in 3 evenings, and around 150 people had the chance to see it here in Vienna, which was extremely exciting and satisfying. So this is kind of where I'm coming from, and I want to shortly talk about these fields of research. So I guess that for most people, if I tell you dance and research together, it's a little bit of like, what are you talking about? Dance is just an activity we do for fun, or it's a social activity. So why do I frame dance under this context of research? So both contemporary dance and contact improvisation are fields that are part of the performing arts. And within those fields, many artists are working and are trying to ask and develop artistic questions. And the very common language to use nowadays is that we are researching in the studio. So for example, I would have a certain question that I'm interested in, and then I will go to the studio and find the methodology in order to research the question. Now, what people are busy with, it's as wide as any other field, so I can give you a few examples to provoke a bit of curiosity. So for example, nowadays there are many people within the world of contact improvisation that are very interested in the topic of sustainability. So how can we understand sustainability first in the body, and how can this be transmitted also through the teaching and then affect people's life? Or for example, in the world of contemporary dance, people are very busy with a lot of questions of identity nowadays, and people are also interested in asking how dance could be a political tool. And my personal interest and my personal curiosity revolves around human consciousness and the exploration of human consciousness, and through that, maybe to understand better the human experience, so to speak. And yeah, so everything that I've been doing was happening kind of because the fact that these fields are very, very open for each person who is part of this field to bring their own interest, rather than, in the world of salsa, for example, people are not doing artistic research. Or maybe I'm wrong about that. Just Anna, who I know is already nodding Nomatan, we also research, so forget about it. But in many different fields, I would say that the research is more limited to the activity, but not so much into the broader, wider world. And this is something that I find very unique within these specific fields in which I'm working. So, yeah, let's talk about contemporary dance. I don't know how many of you know or have experienced contemporary dance. So contemporary dance is a very diverse and evolving artistic form. It's kind of emerged in the mid of the 20th century, and with its emergence, it kind of marked a certain transition or departure from more traditional dance forms. And contemporary dance really focuses on individual creativity and expression, and it encompasses a very, very wide range of physical techniques methodologies for the act of creation. It's also there's also a very strong emphasis on the creation of new movement vocabularies and new methods of working, pedagogical and artistic methods. And when I need to explain people what is contemporary dance in a shorter way, I'm just saying that contemporary dance is the dance of the day. And we, contemporary dance artists, the main question, that kind of the meta question that we are bringing to the studio is, why should we dance today? Like, what is the burning topic, or what is the burning thing right now that we want to explore? Now, one thing that is very unique about contemporary dance, and this I'm pretty sure that I don't know any other dance practice that has this characteristic, is that there is no boundaries to which movement we can include in our dancing. So I'll just give you a little bit of an example of, this is excerpts from different choreographies that I've done in the last years. So yeah, there's no clear boundary to what movement we can do in comparison to, for example, the world of ballet, which has a very specific language. And if I'm doing the language, then I know I'm dancing ballet. But in contemporary dance, we can incorporate any physical movement that we might be interested in exploring. So it poses a certain question about how can we know that we are dancing? If you can do any movement, when do you actually begin dancing and when do you stop dancing? So it's really, and you can see already through this video that there's many different ways of expressing through movement in the frame of contemporary dance. Yeah. So yes, so how do we know we are dancing? So fundamentally, we are shifting, and this is a very, very important shift from behavior to experience. So if I give ballet as an example, in ballet, I need to behave in a certain way. I need to move my body in very specific form. Then everybody can say, you're dancing ballet. In contemporary dance, we cannot rely on this. So we have to ask ourselves, when do we feel ourselves dancing? Which is an internal process. It's an experience. So we are shifting from behavior to experience. I like to say it in a more poetic way. When do we embody the spirit of dance? So this is kind of, in very broad terms, what is the field of contemporary dance. And let's talk a bit about contact improvisation. So contact improvisation is a dynamic and improvised dance that emerged in the 70s in the postmodern scene in New York. And contact is a dance that emphasizes spontaneous movement, a sense of shared weight between the dancers, and it's grounded in principles of touch, of trust, of responsiveness, and it encourages physical communication between two dancers or more. And as you can see in the video, it is being expressed through an unscripted movement that the dancers are co-creating from moment to moment, so it's fully improvised. And there is a emphasis on sharing weight between the dancers, using momentum. And when we dive into this kind of experience, it typically fosters a sense of presence and adaptability, and maybe a sense of shared responsibility between the dancers. And what contact shares very clearly with contemporary dance, that it also doesn't have clear boundaries. The practice is also very open for interpretation. Maybe you can argue, if you know contact well enough, is that maybe it has a bit of a clear center of gravity for what kind of techniques and methodologies the dancers are practicing. But at the end, it spreads from this center into the different interests that different people have. So again, we are operating within the same framework where my experience is more important than how I behave. So we are, again, diving kind of internally into our experiences. Yes, and contact improvisation, where it's being practiced the most, is in contact improvisation jams, and we will dive in a moment to understand what are these jams and why it was kind of very key factor in the development of my own research. So yes, let's talk about the research settings. Now here I'm doing in my own discourse, I took a reference from the psychedelic discourse, and I'm talking specifically about the idea of set and settings. I can assume that most people here know what I'm talking about, but in case not, so within the psychedelic discourse, set and setting refers to set means mindset, so what kind of mindset am I coming into the psychedelic experience, and settings will be what is the environment in which the experience will take place. And in my research, I was more focusing on understanding the needed settings, and currently where I mostly see this potential of accessing altered states is in either performance setting, which was what we have witnessed before, and in a jam setting. So I want to kind of dive into these settings that you can understand a bit better what is happening under these circumstances, and then we will dive into the actual states. So let's start with the performance setting. So if I think about what performance is on the most fundamental level, so it's a situation in which you have one person who is doing something, one or more people that are observing the person doing something, and that there is a shared consent about the situation. So, and this definition can cover a very, very wide array of performance setting, which is not limited to dance. So in a way, right now, we are in a performance setting, because I'm talking in front of you, and you're all observing me, listening to me. But if I think about this very, very wide definition within the context of dance, I would say that in certain dance practices that are, again, part of the world of contemporary dance, it will be a little bit problematic. For example, there is a practice called authentic movement in which you have a doer, an observer, and there is a consent, but I don't think that most of the people will associate it with performance. So maybe another ingredient that is important is that the doer is actively communicating something for the observer. So there is a direct communication from the person who is doing to the person who is observing. And all the rest is just kind of the levels of formalities. So I can invite a colleague to my studio and just ask them to watch me rehearsing something that I'm practicing right now. So they will sit, I will dance, and then we are in a performance setting. But I can also alternatively, rent a theater, sell tickets, have a bar, make a big fuss, light, smoke machine, whatever, and it's still going to be a performance setting, just more formal. And in the foundation of my understanding of performance setting comes the presupposition that attention should be viewed as material. And maybe currently we don't have the ability to measure it or to really find empiric evidence to that. I do think that in certain areas of quantum physics there is some evidence around what I'm trying to say. But on the level of experience, it's very, very easy and accessible to understand what I'm talking about. So the moment somebody is watching you doing something, the experience changes. So if now I will do this and you will all disappear and I will keep talking, it's not going to be the same. Something is happening right now because you're here offering me your attention. So in a way, even saying doer-observer creates a false dichotomy as if the doer is active and the observer is just passive. But in my understanding, observing and offering attention, it's an active thing. So we are both active, just that one is directing the attention and one is doing something with the attention. And I would say that kind of in the optimal spaces, or that's kind of where I'm directing myself, when what can potentially happen is that the audience are coming they offer their attention to the performer, and the performer is using this material to change the space, to transform the space, and from that transformation to reach back to the audience and to connect to them. So there could be the experience could become a shared experience where there's not me watching and there's somebody there doing, but that we are becoming a larger entity together. And kind of, maybe I'll give you one example I mean, this of course doesn't happen every time you go to the theater. Many times you can go to a theater to watch contemporary dance, and then you will more have the experience of sitting and thinking, what the hell am I watching tonight? It's so weird. That could be the case. Maybe you had this tonight also, I don't know. But I have a certain hypothesis, I call it the realness hypothesis, of when this potential could happen. And I'll give you an example. I was once going with my son in Vienna in the metro, and then a few seats next to us, one person started to have a seizure, and he was convulsing on the floor. Now, it was pretty obvious that this is a real thing that is happening in front of us. And the realness of the physicality and the state that that person experienced was immediately capturing all the people around because of the realness of the situation. Now, if you translate this idea to a performance, and I'll give in a moment a few examples, then I believe that there could be the same potential that when we are viewing, we are not busy in analyzing, criticizing, thinking, but we are being sucked into the experience. Now, of course, one of the reasons why I would say it doesn't happen all the time, because many artists are busy with representation. So instead of showing and presenting something real on stage, we might have a certain idea, okay, maybe I want to talk about whatever, the climate crisis, whatever. Then I would start to think, like, how can I represent this idea in different things? So I'm not trying to create reality, I'm trying to represent reality. So the representation already create a gap. So the performers, in the moment that they are on stage, instead of really being fully where they are to some extent having this idea that now I'm representing something that is not real. So there's a gap. But if you think, for example, I don't know if you ever watched circus. Circus is always dealing with the real. No? So you have a person walking, trying to balance on the line, and he or she is like 10 meters high, and they can fall and injure themselves. And you see it in real time. So it does that to your body. No, like it's very difficult to see somebody doing something like this and just kind of, okay, whatever, you feel it immediately. And my intuition tells me that this doesn't need to be only with extreme situation, but it can also be with much more subtle states that we can enter during a performance. And if I'm really going there and I'm not trying to show you what it would be, what it would look like to be in a state, but if I'm really in the state, so somewhere there will be this movement back from your attention back into the audience. And this is a very powerful setting, again, because of the effect of attention. Again, another image for attention for me is a little bit like if you take a pot and you put it under the stove and you put the fire, so the attention is the fire. You start cooking something in the room that will not be there without this active concentration of human attention. So very powerful setting with a lot of potential. Yeah, let's go to the next setting, which is also very interesting, which is jam setting. And when I'm talking about jamming, I'm really referring to the pretty established jamming culture within the practice of contact improvisation. There are other forms of jamming in different practices, but I'm talking about something very specific. So what is a jam setting? So a very simple definition is a space in which people are gathering to practice contact improvisation. But again, we have this problem that contact improvisation cannot be defined by the way we behave. So then how the hell do we know if we are in a jam setting or not? No? So the spaces, the jam spaces are being governed by different principles, and I will share a little bit in order for you to have a bit of kind of a more something that you can kind of grab with the understanding. So a jam is a space in which, again, as I said, there is no clear boundaries. It's very open for personal interpretation, which means that there is a lot of space for individual freedom. So as a person who is in a jam, I can decide how much am I engaging, with who am I dancing, do I want to spend a lot of time observing, do I want to spend a lot of time moving, maybe I also want to just go and socialize a little bit on the side. It also happens. So there's a lot of place for individual choices. And within this landscape, there is no clear leadership. So nobody is leading the space. There's no a person that kind of tells everybody what to do. But each person who comes to the jam is actively co-creating the jam. So there's a real sense of group responsibility. A jam is not a place to consume anything. You're not coming to take something from the jam. You're coming to bring your energy, to be a part of something that is a bit larger than yourself. And what is really interesting in a jam setting is that within the practice of contact improvisation, sometimes we have the tendency for the attention to really come into the individual, and then you can experience yourself as a whole, as a unit that is not separated but is complete in and of itself, while the jam is more the background of your experience, and you can see this kind of moving landscape while you're busy with your own dance. But you can also shift your attention to experience yourself just being a part of this landscape. So a little bit like becoming a neuron in this bigger group brain of movement intelligence. And this kind of shift between the attention that goes into the attention that goes out already starts to affect something on the level of our state of consciousness. And the space is really being governed by coincidence, because again, if you take a large group of people and you enable everybody to improvise and to take their own choices, there will be a lot of coincidence. So part of being in a jam is also the openness to let go of some amount of control, okay? Which is also very important. And the dance is being understood as a form of communication. So we are coming to be with others, to connect, to communicate. So there is there is really something about coming out and embracing other people as well. And of course, within a jam, there are no goals. We are not coming to succeed in something specific, or like to do a certain technique or to do a certain move. There's nothing to achieve but being in the experience. Now, both of these settings, the jam setting and the performance setting, they can also come together. So I could find myself jamming, and then while I'm dancing, maybe I recognize that somebody on the side is looking at me and dedicating their attention. So in a moment, I will appear in a performance setting inside a jam, and vice versa. I can also create a performance that I'm going to use the same principles that are governing a jam space in a performance context. So they could both coexist together. Now, practically speaking, I spend much more hours in my life jamming than performing. But if I'm trying to think like how many times I've been in a jam and I didn't wander to any altered state and I was just there sitting kind of in my normal state, very often. It's not that every time I go to a jam I'm like tripping all over the place, but when I'm performing, it's much more typical that I'm not going to be in my normal state anymore. So I would say that performance setting is a more powerful setting, but jam setting is much more accessible. We have a weekly jam every week in the Movement Lab. I can come every week. There's 2.5 hours. I can practice jamming. So I have much more hours of practice within the jam setting than in the performance setting. Okay, so we are going into kind of the main dish of this presentation, which I want to present you the different altered state of consciousness that I believe that are very accessible through dance. And these are the three states: the somatic state, the kinetic state, and the imaginative states. These terms are terms that I came up with for my own research. I'm not so familiar about other dancers that are doing that work, even though I'm pretty sure there are. I just haven't met any yet. So it's not that these terms are something kind of accepted universally by dancers. And maybe just one clarification. In the level of discourse, I can really explain and create clear boundaries between the different states. But on the level of experience, it doesn't work like this. And I would say that the boundaries are much softer between different states. And the language helps me to come afterwards and kind of to be able to think first, but maybe also communicate with others what I've been experiencing. But in the actual experience, again, like it's not that I'm suddenly knowing, okay, I'm in this state and now I'm exactly in that state, but there is a much more like a gradient between them. And I would say that sometimes you can be in all of them at the same time. Okay. And the last thing maybe to mention before we dive into that, most of my research and where I have the most amount of understanding is about the individual experience. But very often, when I'm already accessing different states, I might be in a situation in which there is also relational aspect. So I'm also being with others. Now, what is happening when different people are interacting with each other with different states? In where I am with the research, I don't have a clear enough language to describe that. So we're going to be talking mainly about the experience of the individual. Okay. Now, since we are talking about altered state, I think it's also worth a while just to talk about, okay, if it's altered, it needs to alter from somewhere. So what is the normal state, so to speak? And when I'm trying to explain it to my students in order to develop the ability to recognize, okay, I was somewhere else. So when I talk about the normal state, I'm always saying that it's a space in which we are operating from our social persona. And the social persona is the space where I have the different roles I'm playing in my life. So for example, I have a certain name that people know me by. I have different roles. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm working as a dancer, I was born somewhere. So I have this kind of different layers of my identity. And this is also the space where most of our daily communication is happening. And now I'm not trying to argument in any way that it's more normal than other state or that it's better or worse. It's just a language that helps me to guide people who I'm working with. Okay, so let's start with the first one, the somatic state. The somatic state is a state which could be understood as a space where my attention is fully dedicated to the inner signals that are manifested by body sensation from moment to moment. And the source of these sensations could be very diverse. So maybe it comes from the fact that I'm experiencing a certain emotion. Maybe it could be related to different internal processes like digestion or the blood that is flowing, etc. Maybe it can be because of my breath. The breath generates sensations. Or my muscles that are contracting and they're contracted and stretched. It can also be by touch, by maybe somebody externally is touching my skin, or maybe just from the music I hear or from the environment, let's say. Now, when I'm in the somatic state, one thing that categorizes it very clearly, I'm not there constructing a hierarchy of desirability. So it's not that I want to experience something. I'm not entering it because I'm craving a certain blissful sensation or something. I'm just there witnessing reality unfolding from moment to moment, from moment to moment. So in a way, you can say it's very similar to, it's a very meditative state, very similar maybe to if you have some experience with Vipassana meditation. Now, what differentiates it from a meditation practice, I would say that first, when I'm in this state, I'm not trying to systematically scan my body like in many different meditation methods. I'm just there allowing my attention to move freely without trying to control it. Now, sometimes maybe I will guide my attention to a specific area in my body that I want to stay for a moment, but generally I'm just allowing the attention to flow. Now, another maybe way to understand it, if you don't have experience with Vipassana, if you ever received a body therapy, like a massage or like somebody kind of giving you offering you touch for longer duration of time, and I have a lot of these experiences that, okay, I'm arriving to a therapist, I'm lying on the bed, maybe in the first 5 minutes we are a bit chatting, but then we stop talking, and then I just dedicate my attention to where I'm being touched, and at a certain point, like the sense of self can dissolve, and then I'm only experiencing myself as this constant flow of sensation. So it's a very meditative and very calming state to be in. Yeah, the next state is the kinetic state, which could be understood as the experiencing the self as the expression of kinetic energy. Kinetic energy, this is the energy that of motion. When things are moving, they are expressing kinetic energy. So what does it mean to experience yourself as kinetic energy? So the direct experience of kinetic energy is also being manifested through body sensation. So pretty similar to the somatic state. But there is a difference that in the kinetic state, I'm trying to harmonize my relationship with the physical forces that are governing our planet. Now, another term that many dancers and movers will use is the flow state. But as far as I'm aware, it also has different references in cognitive science. So I wanted to give it a different name. That's why I call it the kinetic state. So, yeah, what does it mean to allow to harmonize yourself with the physical forces? So, in principle, I want to allow the physical laws, the laws of motion, to govern and guide the trajectory of my movement in space. And the feeling is a little bit as if I'm starting to surf different waves of kinetic energy. Now, I've mentioned the term harmony, and maybe that's something that is good to elaborate a little further, because harmony, when I'm saying harmony, I'm not talking on the level of aesthetics, something that will look necessarily harmonious, and I'm also not talking about an individual interpretation of harmony. I have a very clear, empiric, objective definition of it, which is, does the energy, the kinetic energy flows, or it's being interrupted? Now, let me give you a short demonstration just to look at something. Now, what we're going to see is not necessarily moments where I've been in that state, but it's the physical expression that will be associated with this state. So you can see a little bit, how does it look when kinetic energy flows from one moment to the other? So you can see there's a certain quality of continuation, of fluidity, of roundness. There's a feeling as if there are no end points, but one thing leads to the other. Very creative state to practice. So what do we need to know in order to access it? So a good understanding of physics and anatomy or biomechanics. And when I say good understanding, I'm not talking about the ability to calculate complicated biomechanical equation. I'm talking about embodied understanding of how the physical forces, in which I'm talking primarily about gravity and momentum, how they affect our body, and how and how they interact with our anatomy. Now it's a quite predictable state because these forces are very predictable. You can know pretty guaranteed that tomorrow gravity will keep doing the same thing that it did yesterday, and momentum will keep governing in the way it governs. If not, we have other problems to deal with. So like there's a clear path. Okay, what should I do physically in order to open the potential to arrive into this state? And maybe another thing about harmony, there is no perfect harmony. When I'm talking about perfect harmony, I'm talking about kinetic harmony. On planet Earth, you cannot have perfect kinetic harmony because energy, whenever you express kinetic energy, the energy is starting to disappear. And that's due to three main factors. One, friction. So you throw something, it's gonna, I don't know, you take a ball, you roll it on the floor, friction will start eating and consuming the kinetic energy. The second thing is our anatomy. So anatomical limitation will also create the situation where energy, instead of flowing, will start to disappear. And last is the lack of perfect competency on the level of our craft. So humans, we always operate within the limitation of imperfection. So I can never be perfectly competent to never do anything that will disrupt the flow of energy. In comparison to, like if you throw a ball in out of space, that's it. You charge the ball with your energy, and then now the ball has the kinetic energy that came from your body, and it will keep moving in principle for eternity until it's going to hit something. But on planet Earth, you throw something, gravity pulls it, done. So there is no perfect harmony, but there is an attempt to harmonize ourselves. Now, it's not really accessible for beginners, this state. Like if you don't have experience with movement, you're probably constantly expressing kinetic disharmony. And that's maybe due to the fact that we are embedded in a culture that doesn't prioritize the body and that prioritize more the intellect. So much to the level that maybe at a certain point we will all be absorbed in some virtual reality and forget about the body. But I'm going to be the dinosaur who keep promoting people. Hey, it's here. But yeah. So yeah, let me give you a few more references, kind of that you can understand it a little bit more technically, what is happening and like what am I aiming for. So maybe the first reference is the Albert Einstein model of gravity. So when Albert Einstein developed his theories, he viewed gravity differently than Newton. Newton saw gravity as a force, direct force, linear force that pulls us down. Albert Einstein started to view gravity as a spiral that pulls us down in that fashion. And if we also look at the human anatomy is also you cannot find linear lines in our bones, muscles, and connective tissue. So everything grows like that. So this is already kind of encouraging us that if I want to harmonize with a force that does this, I'm not going to be moving like this. So I'm going to start exploring circular patterns. And the circular patterns will be expressed through spirals, figures of 8, and waves, primarily. And what am I trying to do is to allow my body or different body parts to surrender to the force of gravity, and then to guide them in a circular pattern and to use the energy I have just expressed in order to find the next potential kinetic energy. So when do we have kinetic potential? In each situation that we are perpendicular to the ground. So when I'm perpendicular to the ground, now my body is loaded with potential. If I'm kind of standing here, now I have a lot of potential and I can start falling everywhere. Or if I lift my arm, now I have a lot of potential to generate kinetic energy through my arm. So we are trying to put ourselves in a situation of fall, recovery, and like this to recycle the energy. Now, when you really go into that state fully, and you really allow momentum to take over, you're also entering a greater physical risk. And this also can put you in a certain adrenalized state. So there is a certain sense of aliveness and readiness. And yeah, maybe a nice image to think about it. It's a little bit like when you see a surfer in the ocean standing on the waveboard, and there's this physical wave that is pushing, and the surfer is just trying to align itself in a way that they can keep being on the wave. The difference here is that the wave is invisible, it's inside our body. So there is no external physical object that is pushing us, but we are generating from the body. And this is a very cool state to experience. But again, it really requires dedication and competency. So it's not something I would immediately be able to share with people who have never danced before. Now, specifically about this state, I have the most understanding of how it can be applicable when I'm also relating to others, and that has to do a lot with the practice of contact improvisation, that to some extent also works with similar principles. And when I'm dancing with a partner and we are both entering this kinetic state, so sometimes I have the experience that the physical boundaries of my body, they start to dissolve, and instead of experiencing myself limited to this form, I'm starting to merge together with my partner's body, and just to experience myself as a larger wave of kinetic energy. And this is really super cool experience. Okay, and we are in the last one, the imaginative state, which this is a state that is grounded in our ability to imagine and construct different aspects of ourselves into experiential reality. And what categorizes this imaginative state is something that is quite different than the previous two states. In the previous two states, there is a certain sense that the self dissolves into something else, something more abstract, sensations. But in the imaginative state, there is again a sense of dissolving the self, but there is a certain rise of another self, so to speak. Maybe you can call it a different character or creature, entity, form. It can also be extended to a certain sense of scenario or place, maybe even a story or a narrative. And it's a very, very abstract state to wander in. Now, if I'm thinking like, what is the context that this kind of state appear? My intuition tells me like, okay, we all have different life experiences. We have our personal histories, and to some extent, all these histories are being imprinted into our physical body, into our cells, and we are also embedded in a certain cultural container in which we have heard different stories, different mythologies, different myths, different archetypes that are governing our culture. So all of this is kind of playing a role in giving birth to this, maybe you can call it alter ego, or if you are into psychology, you can call it the subconscious or whatever. But there is a certain interaction between physicality and imagination, and that kind of makes a little crack. And in this little crack, there is a door opening that I can kind of appear in a place which is different than the normal state again. Yeah, so maybe I can give you one example of an experience that I had. So in 2014, I was in a festival in Germany, in Freiburg, and I was invited to teach there, and I met several colleagues, and I got a really nice connection with one American dancer named Anya Cloud. And throughout the festival, we kept on jamming in the evening together and kind of deepening our connection and wandering together into different imaginative spaces. And then one evening, a third person, who is also a teacher, started to interact with us in the jam, which again, within the boundaries of a jam, you can choose freely with who you want to interact. But we were not interested in opening our duet to that person, so we tried to signal him that we are now not interested in dancing with him. But he took the choice to insist on staying in the situation up to a level that it became very, very awkward. Now, we were all to some extent aware that we have also a certain interest in that situation. So even though it was clear, like, we don't want you here, and for him it's like, I want to be here nevertheless, we all kind of agreed to play this game, okay? And at a certain point, I really remember a very vivid sense of connection to my partner that kind of expanded into a sense of brotherhood. Like I started to experience as if we are sharing a certain, like we have some blood tie, or like maybe we are brother and sister. And I started to experience this person, the intruder, really as kind of a tyrannical force that is there to terrorize and in my experience it was really like I really allowed myself to venture into that space, and when he finally left away, I really had the experience that as if I escaped persecution. Now I was just in a room dancing, and there's nothing there, but I allow myself to construct that experience for myself and to process certain things that were interesting for me to process. So in a way, you can say that in the imaginative state, there's also a certain potential for like therapeutic work, maybe. But I would also say that it's a double-edged sword. So you can also kind of enforce trauma if you're going into a space where you're not really ready to go into. And what was interesting that when I talked later with my friend, she also had very similar motives in her experience. So I really have the intuition that when we are really diving into this state, there is a certain potential of expanding it from my experience into something that is, again, could be shared by others. Now, that's, again, as I say, it's the most abstract space, and it's the most difficult for me to guide people how to get there, because there is no clear path for me that leads me into that state. And I would say that it's mostly like a process of something kind of slowly arising, and then I'm recognizing, where am I? Rather than I am walking into the imaginative state. So it's not a linear process into it. And most of the time, what I will do, I will just wander in different physical mental states, and then maybe I will appear in the imaginative state. But I have a certain intuition to what are the source for, or maybe one tool, and that has to do with posture. So I think that if we go back into what I defined as the social persona, the normal state, I think we all have a certain way that we are used to experience ourselves inside our body, and this known self is something it's subconscious. Like, it's not that you're constantly need to think about it, but there's a certain way that you just feel like, this is me in my body. And then if you actively start to play with like different way of being inside your body, so actively trying to deform what is the typical way you're holding yourself, plus if the environment has a certain amount of unfamiliarity, or maybe certain abnormal lights, or certain music, certain energy with the people, then there is a certain potential for this state to come into manifestation. Now, when I talk about the body position, like I would say, like the most maybe easy and banal thing that I can imagine is like if you go to a room and you put some music and you spend half an hour just walking on all four, you might experience yourself a little bit like an animal, for real, not as a representation, but you can find some traces to kind of your certain evolutionary traces. Now that will be a very very simple example, but I believe there is a certain potential there. Now, as I said, it's the most unpredictable state, and but it's also, to some extent, where I have the most amount of attraction. So when I'm dancing, I always have this kind of, where would I end up today? Question in the back of my mind. So yeah, we are kind of arriving to the end. And maybe a few things before we finish that I wanted still to share is that, yeah, I have a really strong intuition and confidence that this very vast territory of different, of altered states is really accessible for everybody who is interested in wandering, in traveling. And that could also happen just with our physical body. We don't necessarily need to consume any substances, even though that I'm not trying to oppose that, but just to say it's also possible like that. And maybe one thing that is kind of crucial in this specific context is first the recognition that something like this, that other states exist. And I think it's different than when you're consuming a substance. I have an example. The partner of my father, he once there was a jar of cookies in his car, and he wasn't aware that these cookies were full of weed, and he just ate them while he was driving, all of them. And then suddenly he felt like, what the hell is going on? Like, you know, it was not his choice. No, he just appeared there. But I think that like it doesn't work like this with dance. No, so I think like the recognition, and maybe that's why like there is a certain correlation between people who are interested in exploring psychedelic substances and the possibility also to use the body in a let's say more neutral way, is because the recognition that okay, there are different states in which I can be. I'm not bound only to this social self, and this is a very key ingredient, I would say, that really can help to venture into this territory, and with that to discover the beautiful secrets that it has to offer us. Thank you. That was the presentation.